Welcome to Ellen White Reconsidered, a series for people who have questions about Ellen White's writings. Today our subject will be expectations. Glad you joined us for Ellen White Reconsidered. I'm Pastor Kevin Morgan. I pastor the Warrensville Seventh-day Adventist Church, and I've done a lot of research about Ellen White, written several books, and contributed on the Adventist Electronic Encyclopedia. I'm currently working on a book entitled Glory, Glory, Glory. It's about Ellen White's early vision books. But today we want to take up the topic of expectations. What is it that people expected? In all of her early writings, the emphasis is on visions, which she described as views. Notice her introductory statement. By the request of dear friends, I have consented to give a brief sketch of my experience and views, with the hope that it will cheer and strengthen the humble, trusting children of the Lord. In the supplement to that first work, she wrote, Dear Christian friends, as I have given a brief sketch of my experience and views, published in 1851, it seems to be my duty to notice some points in that little work, also to give more recent views. Then in 1855, she began publishing individual testimonies for individuals and churches, the first one being for the Battle Creek Church, and she wrote, November 20th, while in prayer, the Spirit of the Lord suddenly and powerfully came upon me, and I was taken off in vision. The next year, she wrote, At the conference at Battle Creek, May 27th, 1856, I was shown in vision some things that concerned the church generally. The glory and majesty of God was made to pass before me. We see in her first true book, which was called Spiritual Gifts, an introduction by Roswell F. Cottrell. He wrote, after an exposition on why the biblical gift of prophecy should continue in the last days, are we not justified then in the conclusion that when the remnant are fully confirmed in the testimony of Jesus, they will come behind in no gift, waiting for the coming of our Lord Jesus Christ? Then we find in her next book, which was Spiritual Gifts, Volume 2, Ellen White's own preface. Having borne my testimony and scattered several books containing my visions in the eastern, middle, and western states, and formed many happy acquaintances, I have felt it my duty to give to my friends and to the world a sketch of my Christian experience, visions, and labors in connection with the rise and progress of the third angel's message. I've been working on a list of all of Ellen White's visions, and I included the progress report right here because it gives us some idea of which visions were in the earliest book and which ones were in Spiritual Gifts Volume 2. The ones in the earliest book are marked in yellow, and the reference is given for all those that are in Spiritual Gifts Volume 2, the autobiographical work. So let's take a look at it. You see here we begin in 1844 with her first vision. That was the only one in that year. And then in 1845, quite a few, as we see, but the majority are not in the first book. There you go. You can see them as they move through the years and down through the 50s, different visions. And towards the end, I haven't gotten it all up to date, but you can see quite a few visions all the way through the 50s and up to the publication of spiritual gifts in 1860. So then in volume 3 of spiritual gifts, the subject matter changes. The first one was largely the vision that she received in Ohio, Lovett's Grove, in 1858, and with some visions that were earlier that were worked in. But then in the second volume, it's autobiographical, and now she starts in volume 3 to do something quite different. She begins to recount biblical history, and she calls this facts of faith. So I'd like to read to you from the third volume. In presenting this, my third little volume, to the public, I am comforted with the conviction that the Lord has made me his humble instrument in shedding some rays of precious light upon the past. So it's shedding light. She's using the facts of faith as the fundamentals, the biblical account. And she says here, sacred history relating to holy men of old is brief. So she's going to expand on it just slightly. Since the great facts of faith connected with the history of holy men of old have been opened to me in vision, I have been more than ever convinced that ignorance as to these facts and the wily advantage taken of this ignorance are the grand bulwarks of infidelity. So she's trying to build on something that is public record, the Bible account. She is not pretending to just describe visions that she's had, but she is expounding on it. And then her last note is interesting to consider. If what I have written upon these points shall help any mind, let God be praised. So she is hopeful that what she is producing can help the faith of those who read it. She's not purporting to give a listing of her visions. Volume 4 continued the facts of faith, you can see, and she finished that out. It didn't all fit in volume 3. And then she had a section on the laws of health, and then she included some of the testimonies that had been printed as individual pamphlets, now gathered together and also sorted because they took out some that were duplicated and some that weren't of general interest. So how do we close out this subject? Well, I'd like to finish by showing you something that I think that a lot of people might be surprised to see. In fact, there were a number of people that have quoted online that in Ellen White's Great Controversy, there were page after page without quotation mark. So I pulled the book off the shelf at the Ellen White estate when I was visiting there one time, and I started thumbing through and looking for quotation marks, and I discovered some very interesting markings. Here are a few excerpts from the book. Take a look at the highlighted punctuation and tell me what you see. Okay, here's 1, 2, 3 quotations. Look at what I've highlighted. There are quotation marks that are on the page, but notice also the dot, dot, dot. Can you see that? Dot, dot, dot. What does dot, dot, dot mean? Those are ellipses, and they tell us that Ellen White used a source, as she was quoting from a source, but she shortened it by leaving something out, or perhaps the original that she quoted from left something out. These are indications of use of sources. All right. Now let's take a look at another quotation, and this is not an isolated one. There are several others that are like it. Notice the punctuation here. You have nested quotation marks on the outside of the quotation, and then single quotes that indicate that the person that is being quoted was quoting somebody else. That happens several times in the book. So it really shouldn't have been a surprise for anybody in particular about this book that Ellen White used sources throughout, even though she didn't overtly mention that. There's one more thing that I want to show you, and that's that she references, in a general sense, people before she quotes them. She also gave other indications that she was quoting. Notice here she uses a Christian who is Tertullian. She references him. And then we have an old writer quoted here who happens to be Thomas Fuller. Okay. And then a Catholic writer who's quoted here, you can see. Who's the Catholic writer? Well, it's Cochleus, but that wasn't essential to the point she was making, so she just made it a general reference. And then again, we have a papist here who's actually Faber, who's quoted. And then we have one of the reformers, Farrer. I'm guessing that's how you pronounce it. And then one more, one of the princes, which was John Frederick, also here quoted. So quotation after quotation. It's a surprise to me, but some people missed all of those details. So Ellen White decided to let people know for sure. In the next edition of the book, I have a copy of it. This is the 1888 Great Controversy. It's a standalone book at first. It's the first one in a new series called The Conflict of the Ages. She gives us indication, very clear indication, that she is using sources. She wrote a revised and enlarged edition. You notice here. And notice the description, revised and enlarged. She also included some new material that wasn't in the earlier version, and she added an author's preface. And the author's preface there, explains what she did for those who hadn't recognized it before. And here we read in her own words what she did from the beginning, but now she's making it clear for the reader. The great events which have marked the progress of reform in past ages are matters of history well known and universally acknowledged by the Protestant world. They are facts which none can gainsay. And it's a puzzle to me why some people didn't catch this when she said it very clearly. Some studies have been done of great controversy, and people wondered how is it that she used a particular source? Well, here she's saying she's using well-known history, and if she didn't use well-known history, people would question it. This history I've presented briefly in accordance with the scope of the book and the brevity which must necessarily be observed. The facts having been condensed into as little space as seems consistent with a proper understanding of their application. In some cases where a historian has so grouped together events as to afford in brief a comprehensive view of the subject, or has summarized details in a convenient manner, his words have been quoted. But except in a few instances, as we noticed before, no specific credit has been given, since they are not quoted for the purpose of citing that writer as authority, but because his statement affords a ready and forcible presentation of the subject. She also used sources in describing the Advent movement of which she was a part. She says, in narrating the experience and visions of those carrying forward the work of reform in our own time, similar use has occasionally been made of their published works. So she used quotations sometimes, but generally, as she says here, she condensed the well-known facts so that people could hear the story and she could apply it and add the moral lessons, the significance of it as was revealed to her. So, why do people think that she could only get her information from visions? Well, maybe part of that has to do with some of the statements she's made that they interpreted in a blanket way, or maybe it has to do with their understanding of inspiration and how it works. Either way, what we're seeing here is that she does not underperform what she has promised. And we're going to see some more about this in our next episode. Thanks for joining us today. Hope you have a great day.